obviously this week has been busy with Brexit news. There's been a lot going on. It's changing all the time. But let's just kind of step back a bit. And I'd like to ask kind of how did we get here and where are we at the moment?
Okay, easy first question. How did we get here? Largely, well, I mean, we could go back into sort of history and say, you know, make arguments about the British being different from other Europeans and that, you know, our island history takes us in a different path. I'm not sure that's actually terribly helpful and not very enlightening, because if you go to any other European country, they'll tell you the same, that how they are different. You know, the French are not like other countries and the Germans are not like other countries. More narrowly, really, this has all happened because of party politics, and particularly David Cameron, when he was in the coalition, 2010 onwards, really came under a lot of pressure from his backbench about trying to be a bit more Eurosceptic and kind of making concessions that he thought would appease those individuals, keep them on side, help keep the coalition going. And so back in 2013, we had a speech at Bloomberg where David Cameron promised a referendum if he won the next general election. And at that point, he didn't think he was going to win that general election. And then boom, 2015, he did and had to pony up on that. So really, from that starting point, which was very narrowly about managing his party, we've ended up with a renegotiation that David Cameron went through with the EU, the referendum itself, where the government thought, you know, because it's such a big existential question and there's so many uncertainties about leaving, that people wouldn't leave. And then we end up with this result. And 23rd of June 2016, I think, was a really big shock for a lot of the political system and for a lot of commentators as well, that this was totally unexpected. The thing that maybe I think a lot of people watching today will be concerned about is that you can understand the immediate shock, but what makes less sense is that even now, 2.5 years later, we still don't seem to have a consensus about what we're doing. And I think this is maybe the real dilemma, is that we've got a decision to leave, but we don't really have a rationale for why we're leaving. What's the purpose of the exercise? And you know, different people have tried to advance different arguments about that. Theresa May has maybe come closest, you know, but ever since last year's general election, which we were talking about just before we started on this, losing her majority, losing a lot of her authority and respect from her party has made the process so much more complicated. So everyone's still fighting over where we're going, why we're doing it. And as long as we have that, we're going to have some really big challenges, and I'm sure we'll unpack some of those as we go along.
Yeah, sure. I think what you just said there is really interesting about the feeling that even 2 years on, there's still kind of a lack of consensus. Could you tell us a little bit more about, especially this week, what we've been hearing from various Conservatives and also maybe Labour and SNP as well, and what different groups are saying at the moment?
Okay, so this week what we've got is the provisional agreement around a text for the terms on which the UK leaves the EU. So it's just about ending the relationship that's based on membership of the EU. It says a little bit about what the future relationship is going to be like, but actually most of it is not about that. So when you're hearing a lot of the criticism in the last few days from all sides about where we're going with this, it's not really what the text is talking about. It's about how do we deal with the liabilities of no longer being members next March. So Theresa May needs to get that. She's got the approval of Cabinet, and that was Wednesday. And then Thursday, we've had all of the resignations, the really hard debate in Parliament. It was easier to count the number of people who spoke in favour of the deal in Parliament yesterday than the number of people who resigned from her government. And really, the opposition comes from lots of different directions. So you've got some within the Conservatives who want to have a much more definitive break. They don't want to have extended commitments towards the EU financially, regulatory terms, the role of the Court of Justice, this backstop arrangement with Ireland. All of those things look like they stretch into the future. And if we're leaving, we should leave, and that means we break the ties and we break the commitments. On the other side, you've got those who want to either remain or who want a much closer relationship, a much softer relationship, saying, well, we're giving up all these things and we need to actually try and be working with the EU because the EU is still going to be there.
Yeah.
And I know sometimes people think perhaps once we leave, Europe disappears and we don't ever have to talk about this again. It's still going to be there. It's still going to be an important part of the UK's international relations. So why not have the constructive, positive relationship that Theresa May also says she wants? She wants to have as close a possible relationship, subject to the red lines that she set out. So one of the reasons why this show stays on the road for now is that whilst nobody likes Theresa May's deal, there's not a clear consensus about what the alternative path should be. Should it be much closer relationship? Should it be not leaving at all? Or should it be a much harder relationship? Just walk away? Why do we have to put up with the compromises that have been forced on us by these European types? So as long as she doesn't find the emergence of a clear alternative, she's got, I think, a not unreasonable expectation that actually people will decide that this deal, problematic though it is not as problematic as the options and the alternatives that are out there.
Interesting.
Which is not really very positive. It's not great politics, to say this isn't good, but the other things are even worse. But I think it's kind of where we are.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and it gives a good kind of overview of how complicated this whole process is.